I'll just make one very quick comment, which is to say that you have to start early. The very first time you hand over tech to your kids, you have to set the ground rules, and you have to keep setting the ground rules. If you leave it till they're already more tech-savvy than you, pretty much you've lost that ownership of the conversation. There are ways to take it up again, and on that note, I'll hand over to Nikki.
Sure.
So one of the things I say to parents is that you have to beware of giving away the remote control too soon. And as Arthur said, start early. And that starts with babies right now. Parents are handing over phones and tablets to them to soothe them and calm them when they have a meltdown.
To occupy them.
To occupy them and distract them from their distress. And in so doing, you actually take away the skill of learning how to self-regulate, learning how to get to grips with your emotions, and learning how to get them under control.
Is there a potential then, if kids crying, give them something to occupy themselves, here's a tablet, is there also a possibility of building an association with that?
Absolutely. And we have the same association being built up with sleep. The children cannot sleep if they don't have a device in their hands or a screen in front of them. So it's a bit like giving your child, you know how with babies we give our children doo-doo blankets and dummies. And then we fight like hell at the age of 2 or 3 to get those things away from them. Now what we're doing is we are adding another doo-doo blanket and another dummy in the form of a device. And I have parents constantly asking me, what do I do? My child won't eat unless they have a screen in their hand.
Wow.
So we're actually pairing very normal daily regimes and activities like eating and sleeping with a device. So our children are forming this association, and we find that they can't do without. Now, the bottom line, I believe, is that we want to create children who are healthy switchers, who know how to switch between real and virtual. And that's our job as a parent, is to ensure that our children can exist having a conversation at a dinner table face to face and enjoy it, not just do it, but actually get some satisfaction out of it and discover what it means to be human, while at the same time be tech savvy and be able to navigate technology on a screen well, because the world of work is going to be full of technology and screens.
There's one of the largest growing subsections in, say, the geek community is actually board gaming. That there's a transition for families to actually sit around, because it's a social activity, and it doesn't necessarily require the technical aspect. So I guess that's another boon for the board gaming sector, that you could actually start associating those sorts of things with family activities rather than everybody sitting on their tablets.
So what we have to understand about child development is that children learn in 3 phases: concrete, semi-concrete, and abstract. So concrete is the real, semi-concrete is the picture of, and abstract would be the symbolic.
Sure.
So the letter I or a dot or a number. And parents very often don't understand what concrete learning is, that it starts with real. And I'm glad you've raised the board game thing, because I'm an absolute play fan. Games are part of my DNA, so games and toys are vital.
I didn't realize you're part of our tribe. Nice.
I am. I can't say I'm a cult gamer, but children need to be surrounded by real games and toys, and have a good balance of exposure between real and then the on-screen stuff. And it's really great to give your kids educational games and toys in the early years, in the real sense and in the virtual sense, as long as the real comes first in that ECD, early childhood development phase. Because there is no meaning to a picture of an orange if you've never experienced a real orange. You haven't smelt it, you haven't touched it, you don't know it's round, it's rough, it's juicy, it's sweet and sour and all those things. It's just a picture if it's on a screen. It has no meaning. I haven't internalized meaning. And in the early years, we have to help children internalize meaning. So Arthur was saying, start young with the boundaries. And that means that we commit to teaching real human relationships, real meaning about life, before we start giving them too much access to the virtual. And today it's very easy as busy parents to palm your child off to a screen.
Well, talking about how easy it is to palm it off the screen, I'd also like to talk about the prevalence of technology. So Arthur, when we're talking the number of interactions that a that a child, a teenager might have, a parent might look at this and go, I'm only thinking about the phone, I'm only thinking about the laptop. Maybe give us an idea of the actual prevalence that technology, the exposure of technology to a child, the number of influences that a child might actually have.
That's a very good point. And in fact, it begins very early and began decades ago with the TV screen. So that was always the big issue for parents, is how much time the kids spend in front of the TV screen and how the TV has become the babysitter. Now they talk about the tablet being the babysitter. In 10 years' time, it'll be the interactive display on the wall that is projected from the ceiling in every room and on every available surface. Even when you're sitting in the bathroom, there'll be an interactive display on the wall next to you. And you won't be able to escape those displays or screens. Right now we talk about screens. I think the screen will go away, but the display will replace the screen. Mm-hmm. And that means that it will be even more pervasive in years to come than it is today. Mm-hmm. And that creates a massive challenge. It did 20 years ago with TV. It does now with the tablet and the smartphone. And it will in 10 to 20 years' time with the display. So it really begins with the boundaries that you set and the availability that you create in your environment for those kids. You can't really blame the screen anymore. You can't blame the display because that's been with us for most of our living memories. So the issue really is how much time the child spends in front of their display, how much time you allow them to spend, and the kind of boundaries. Again, as I said in the beginning, it's all about setting those boundaries early and maintaining those boundaries throughout their growing up. It's only when they get to the age of 16, 17, 18, and they're becoming adults and they're making their own decisions that you pretty much have to let go. But again, you've got to start young. At a later stage, it can be a question of you are paying for that access or that device or the account or the data, whatever the case might be. There's the well-known ad of the kid asking for the Wi-Fi password, and the dad says the Wi-Fi password is do your chores. So until you've done your chores, you don't get access to the Wi-Fi. It can be something as simple as resetting the Wi-Fi password and not handing it back to the kids until they've done their homework or whatever the case might be. Yeah. And or the Wi-Fi conveniently goes down, which happens anyway all the time. And you then kind of have control, and people say the kids will run rings around you, they're more tech savvy, but there are basic controls like the Wi-Fi password, for example, where it's not that easy to hack into it if it's done properly. You've got to be a serious hacker, and the kids might be amateur hackers and part-time hackers all the time, but they're not really serious hackers. Sure. So you can still control those elements, but rather than control them through kind of depriving the kids, you need to have them understand that there's only so much time they spend with that display.
Okay. I'd like to talk about the dangers that are out there, and this is not fear-mongering in any way, but there are things that make it safer to be on an online environment, etc. Now, it's not always a binary thing either. There's not always, there is danger, there is not danger. There can be subtle things like bullying online. Parents might not necessarily know that if somebody's playing online, they're playing their favorite games, and then chat screens or conversations online, there could be some bullying aspects. So what are the first steps that a parent should take when it comes to ensuring the safety of their child online? Nikki.
Well, apart from installing parental controls and digital safety filters, I always say to parents that the best protection for your child is actually your relationship with your child.
Right.
So when we talk about boundaries and things like that, what other options are you giving your child other than a screen? Are you having dinner together? Are you having conversations? And conversation forms the cornerstone of relationships. So when things are happening out there in the big wide world and being reported on, so some schoolgirls are caught having live sex, and it's put out on the internet and it goes viral, there is dinner table conversation for you.
Right.
That is what I call a teachable moment.
And it's not necessarily this doesn't change because it's a technologically based conversation. This is a conversation you would have had anyway with your kids.
Exactly. It just so happens that the technology today can enable more people to witness what went on, and we need to talk to our children about their digital reputation. Because from the time they first set up a social profile anywhere online, they start building a digital reputation. And that is a very big thing, because it's like putting out a personal advertisement. So we have to look at the kind of words we use when we talk to our children. It's important that we talk to them and give them examples they can grasp, that they can grab onto. Sure. So for example, when I talk to kids in schools, and I start from grade 5 all the way up to matric, I say to them, so tell me, how have your parents taught you to keep safe in the real world? And it's incredible. They give me so much information. And so they tell us things like, well, they've taught us how to cross the road. We look left, we look right, we look left again. Now, you can take that into the digital space and say, well, actually, you're now on the information superhighway. There are way more cars on this superhighway than there are in the real world. And you have to be aware of how you drive on this information superhighway. So then you start talking about the fact that there are many more strangers on that information superhighway than there are in the real world.
Would you, you get a lot of memes, you see a lot of videos online of parents who sometimes take an extreme example of they've set up a fake date of meeting somebody and then trying to scare the kid into proving this is exactly how unsafe this could be. From a parental expert, is that something that should be happening?
You know, there's a fine line between instilling fear and using scary stories to give them a wake-up call.
Right.
I think it does depend how old they are.
Sure.
But, you know, I think those stories can be very useful. And that's why I'm saying take what's happening in the real world, what you hear in the news, and bring it to the table and say, now, what would you do if you were in this situation? We like to talk about scenario planning with your children. As a parent, you're the CEO of your family. And you have to act like a CEO, which means you are looking out for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you need to be on the lookout, you need to be awake, and so you need to be doing scenario planning, and you need to be having conversations with your children about, you know, when you go out, and this is the safety mantra that I give my children, and it's built into the book, and I use this in all my talks. Children need to consider they're going to have to take responsibility and they're going to have to make choices from a much earlier age today than we ever did because of their exposure to the world through technology. Because every time they post, tweet, like, or share, that is a choice. And that choice will color their digital reputation, and that digital reputation will walk with them wherever they go into the future. So I say to them, they have one mind. They have one body. They have one reputation. And that's really all you need to remember when you're making choices and decisions. Is it good for my mind? Is it good for my body? Is it good for my reputation? And if you get a yes, 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 go for it. But if there's a no somewhere, you have to start having an internal conversation. Well, actually, bottom line is just don't do it until you're absolutely sure. So really short, sexy sound bites as opposed to sermons.
If I can take that back a few steps, it also starts with, as Nikki was indicating, the conversation that you have. And a point I always make is that the conversation is more important than the technology. So you're not really trying to tell the kids how to use technology because you're just going to sound stupid because they're using it in ways that you haven't yet imagined. But in terms of the conversation about what's happening in that environment, that's critical. And again, if you're starting early, then you also share the journey into the technology world with your children. And by sharing that journey, you ensure that they are sharing what happens with them. So for example, when you first allow your child onto Facebook, and technically they should be 13 when they go onto Facebook for the first time, a lot of parents don't want their kids to suffer FOMO. The parents themselves suffer from a kind of projected FOMO of their kids not being part of that social conversation on Facebook. So they allow their kids to go onto Facebook, And in those circumstances, very often, they're allowing them to go on unsupervised because they're not thinking about the implications of what they're doing. So why would they want to supervise if they don't care about the implications? But let's say they're allowing the kids to go onto Facebook officially for the first time at 13. Part of that allowing them to go on must be a shared experience where the parent guides the child into that environment, shares the experience, and also asks the child initially to always talk to them about what they're going to be posting, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Share that with the parent, not for the parent to control what they're doing, but just to guide them in case they are doing or saying something inappropriate. And in that way, very often you'll find that if there is bullying that begins, and this is a major issue on Facebook right now, but also moving to Instagram, believe it or not, and certainly to Snapchat. Snapchat bullying is becoming a major issue, and parents are very clueless about what's happening in Snapchat because it disappears in 8 seconds typically.
Okay, so if for some parents, this actually leads into the next question I wanted to ask you. It's very much taking a journey with the child, with your teenager, that you understand what's happening. But some parents aren't necessarily technologically inclined. So my next question, follow-up, would have been, how does a non-tech savvy parent upskill themselves? I found it very interesting, Nikki, that you started talking about SWOT analysis and scenario management. These are all mentions that very much corporate in nature, and these are all business-style practices. So how does a parent start upskilling themselves and getting, I know Facebook, I know this, I know this WhatsApp thing you're speaking of. What's Snapchat? How does a parent start upskilling themselves that way?
The first step is obviously to download the app onto their own phones. And any parent who's got children with smartphones or tablets has an obligation to also have a smartphone or a tablet. They need to understand where their kids are functioning. So a parent wouldn't allow a 10-year-old child, well, some do, to run around loose in a mall without them being around. There are some parents who actually drop their kids off at the mall while they go out for dinner, or whatever the case might be. That shouldn't be happening. And most parents understand that you can't just leave a little child alone in a mall. And part of the reason for that is that the parents themselves know what the mall is about and know how to navigate it. So when they go with a child to the mall, they know how to handle the child in that environment, or where the child is allowed to run free, where the child isn't allowed to run free, where there's got to be controls. So the same thing needs to happen in the digital world. So if the child has a smartphone, the parent must have a smartphone. If the child is on Instagram, the parent should be on Instagram, although I know that very rarely happens. At the very least, the parent should know what Instagram is and what the child is posting on Instagram. So certainly in the early days, in the early stages of the child going online, the parent actually has an obligation to follow that child online. They have an obligation to understand what the apps on the phone are. Today it might be Instagram and Snapchat. Tomorrow it will be something else. The Japanese social media app Line might suddenly make a breakthrough into the Western teenage market through a new functionality that all the kids are using. And the parent will be absolutely clueless because they're still stuck in the world of Facebook and Twitter and perhaps Instagram, and in very rare cases, Snapchat. So when you look at that kind of landscape and the potential of what could come next, you can see that parents are completely at sea in this environment, and they actually have a responsibility to understand what's happening. You can say, how do they do it, and how does a non-tech savvy parent do it? Well, they've got to force themselves. In the same way that in the real world, when a new shopping mall is built, they go exploring it with the kids before they allow the kids to sample the pleasures of that shopping mall. And the same should happen in the online world. I know it's glib, I know it's easy to say that, but the reality is that parents have an obligation to do that.
Thank you.
So here's a soundbite. We are no longer the sage on the stage, we're the guide alongside, because we are discovering this technological world with our children.
Right.
In the same way as we teach our children how to have conversations, how to not be rude to people, how to look people in the eye. You know, all these little social subtleties of real-world connection. We also need to teach our children and groom them from our perspective on how to have a decent on-screen, online conversation with somebody. So basic rules apply, like never text anything to somebody who, never text something to anybody that you wouldn't say to them face to face. So once again, we go back to healthy role modeling in the real world. It's important for us to have those face-to-face dinner table conversations so that children actually understand what it feels like to be human, the impact of our words on people. And if you have those conversations in a real-world scenario, you get to understand that people's faces change when we talk to them, that we have impact. So even if you type something in on a screen, you are still having impact. And I say to kids often, you know, you don't know what the other kids on the WhatsApp group, what kind of a day they've had or what they're going through. And you might say, oh, go kill yourself, in a very glib sort of conversational, you think conversational way, but meanwhile this child is going through some trauma, and what you just said could send them right over the edge. So there is that danger that if parents don't make time to really connect with their children in a real world, that kids' EQ is dropping, and I think that is a real threat. Because we role model emotional intelligence. You don't teach EQ in a vacuum. You don't teach conversation skills in a vacuum.
It requires feedback.
It requires feedback, exactly. And I think that parents also need to create new rites of passage. We don't have a lot of rites of passage for our children anymore, unless you're very religious. You don't have a lot of rites of passage. And I think some of the technology stuff can be used as rites of passage, like at what age will you give your child a phone? Maybe you're going to give them a very basic phone in their very early years in primary school because you want them to be able to get hold of 5 people. And maybe by the age of, and I think when we wrote the book, we were kind of, because your Facebook and Instagram, etc., age 13 is your guideline. But I talk to these audiences of children all the time, and I'm telling you, by 9, 10 years of age, they've all got internet-linked smartphones. Not all, but increasingly. Not just a phone, but an internet-linked smartphone. And with that comes responsibility. And parents have to teach their children how to take responsibility. Just using a device doesn't make you a responsible user. You have to learn how to make wise choices. So when are you going to give your child a phone? When are you going to give them an internet-linked phone? When are you going to let them have social media accounts? And if it's a rite of passage, it's, as Arthur said, you go and you open that account together. And you need training wheels like you're riding a new bicycle. And so for 6 months, you might journey with that child, teaching them how to have intelligent conversations.
I think you've answered the question that I wanted to ask next, is that parents are the keepers of all knowledge.
We're the gatekeepers.
We're the gatekeepers of all knowledge. But now there's an understanding that a new piece of tech has come out. I don't know it. My kid doesn't know it. I was going to ask, what are the techniques for a parent to become vulnerable enough to share with their kid, I need to learn this with you. But what you've just described is, by going through a process of we're going to do it together, you can actually mask that vulnerability. And I can say, well, I'm actually learning this on the sly, but I'm doing it with my child.
Look, our children are teaching us as well. I mean, there is no way that we can keep up with the prevailing technology. We have to make the effort, we have to make the commitment. But it's also okay to ask your kids for help. And I learn new things from my kids about technology every day. Not just my own kids, but young people younger than me. I'll be sitting somewhere and I'll be going, I really wish I knew how to take a screenshot on my phone, because I want to send this to somebody, and a 24-year-old across the room says, oh, but you just do this and this. Well, that was my learning of the week. You know, and that's such a useful thing that I use every day, and I absolutely attribute that learning to a young person. And every week I try and learn at least one thing about something to do with the device.
You can flip that around as well, and you can challenge the kids to come up with something constructive in whatever environment they play. So, for example, create a YouTube video The ability for a child to create a YouTube video is going to translate later on into the ability to leverage this digital environment so effectively that the kind of things that we were doing when we were leaving school will look like we were still in kindergarten.
Right.
So let's say Snapchat. Challenge the child to create a Snapchat video that can be shared as content on Snapchat that's going to give other people information. For example, how to create a Snapchat educational video that even the teachers could use. I haven't seen anything like that. It's just off the top of my head. But that kind of intervention could be hugely valuable for the child and for people they interact with. That's a Snapchat. YouTube is obvious. Create a YouTube video. In future, everyone will have to market themselves. Already, a lot of individuals rely on the digital environment to market themselves as opposed to trying to be part of a larger organization. And in every social platform and every digital platform, there's the opportunity to leverage it in that way. The point I'm making isn't that you or the kids have to learn each of these platforms, but that it's an opportunity to challenge them to use these platforms constructively and to produce something rather than simply be absorbing and consuming.
There's a potential very easily these days for fame, for a bit of a following, that now I'm starting to do these types of tutorial videos and to actually get internet fame, YouTube fame, etc. To try and relate that to maybe like the 70s and 80s and the Hollywood parents who were seen to be like just pushing their kid and doing these sorts of things. How does a parent handle the idea of all of a sudden my 12-year-old who is speaking to an audience now, maybe of other 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, they're starting to get celebrity. How does a parent then handle that? Because that's, it would happen to any actor or actress that got famous at a young age. And I don't necessarily know that parents realize exactly how quickly that could happen.
Yeah.
How does a parent handle that?
There's a fine line because our children actually should have a right to digital privacy. And this starts from very early on. So just taking a step back from your question to the fact that some parents are starting Facebook profiles for their children before they're born and taking away their children's right to
the
privacy
profile
online.
pic is the in utero photo.
Exactly. And then that profile has been set up. We warn parents in the book about the kind of content that they're posting about their children online. Because it's all very well to put cutesy pictures of your children running naked down the beach, but there are pedophiles and predators out there who are just waiting for that kind of a picture. So it's important that we as adults role model using privacy settings on our social media profiles and using discretion when sharing pictures and information about our children. As proud as we may be, we also have to use discretion as much as we are teaching our children to do those things. Because one day our children might look back and go, why did you post that picture? And even as parents of teenagers, I know Arthur and I have had these conversations, we get permission from our children before we post pictures of our children online because they're old enough to have an opinion.
Right.
And what you think might be a good-looking picture, they think is geeky and gawky and stuff like that.
This ties into the idea of reinforcing to them that you have your social media identity and reputation, so I'm aware of this. I'd like to acknowledge that and show you. Do you want this? You're effectively your own press agent.
Because this is an advert. This is your billboard for your life, actually, for who you are. Whether it's us as adults putting stuff out or whether it's our kids. And so everybody has to make very careful choices. And I say to kids, if you were Coke, Apple, or Nike, you would have a huge social media digital team vetting every single word they craft about the brand and put out there, asking 10 times, is this okay to put out before they actually post it? And a whole lot of people would check it and vet it first. And yet we are putting stuff out there without even thinking about it.
Right.
And then going on to, your children becoming famous, I think I'm going to hand over to Arthur at this point because he has a daughter who has had a movie channel. of her own for some time, and you've had to take decisions around that.
Yes, she's now 18, but when she was 16, she started her first YouTube channel. She's tried a few. She's experimenting, really. And part of the deal is that she'll run stuff by us. And there was one particular video she put up, and I looked at this and I said, no, that ending is a bit dodgy. And at first it resulted in some fairly serious arguments. And I'm sure that's the kind of thing that most parents will encounter.
So not to pry too much. When you say dodgy, was it views that she expressed, something that she tried to demonstrate? What was the nature of it?
It was unintentionally suggestive and inappropriate as a result at that age. So when the child is older, when the child becomes an adult, you can't really control or dictate that kind of thing. Some parents still try to. But at that age, it was inappropriate, as I say, unintentionally. And after talking it through, she edited and changed it, and in fact, it turned out to be a better product. So she was quite happy in the long run. But she also experiments with Twitter and Instagram, and generally speaking, she understands what is appropriate, what isn't, and what could land one in trouble. But she's also using it to develop her own voice, and she's quite outspoken about issues like human rights and the educational rights of children as well. And I'm quite happy to give her that leeway because she uses it responsibly, but more than using it responsibly, she's also evolving her own voice, and you've got to give children the space to do that as well. As long as you're watching what they're doing and guiding them when it crosses certain boundaries, because there are boundaries that you don't want to cross when it's still a child, and it's possibly going to affect both their education and their future career. So you can act as the sage on stage, to use Nikki's term, at that point. But a lot of the time, they're actually leading the way. And she, in fact, in many ways, is a groundbreaker herself. And she's actually leading me. She's teaching me what's possible in this environment in many ways. But just to go back to the kid becoming famous, Nikki and myself have had a lot of interaction with someone who's become a friend of ours, Nadav Ossendriver, who's founded the Latest Sightings website, app, and YouTube channel. It's the most visited YouTube channel in South Africa. Has something like 350 million views and about 250,000 subscribers. It's a massive success, and he launched it when he was 15. And it was an overnight success. He's become a celebrity, but also a successful businessman. And his parents had to cope with the fact that their child was now almost the sort of standard bearer of the family. But they acted as a support team or a support structure for him, rather than seeing it as something that was detrimental to them. They're obviously deeply proud of their son, and they support him every step of the way, and they are almost part of the team that pushes the concept and the business forward. So I think that's, generally speaking, how parents need to deal with it if their kids do accidentally or on purpose become celebrities in this environment. I
think the accidental might be more interesting, but all right.
Yes. No, I think it's important to be your children's cheerleaders, but also to be a grounding influence. And I think runaway fame at a very early age can be incredibly detrimental, because that sort of stuff, it's rare that it continues for long, and it can burn out. The implications of that are that, well, I peaked. What next? You know, so we have to be careful that we're not doing, a horse and pony show with our children, living vicariously through them. And I think that's the distinction: is, is this about you, or is it about your children? And it is, as Arthur said, it can be either intentional or accidental. Your child might launch an amazing career around something, whether it is to become a movie director, and you've been doing really interesting stuff on YouTube, so you can showcase those skills when you get into your early 20s, or even when you're applying for maybe some kind of position at a university. And talking of that, the CV, the old wooden written CV, is going to die.
Yes.
And in the book, we do talk about a concept that was raised in my previous book, Future Proof Your Child, which is developing a talent profile. And today, and in the future, increasingly, when you go for a job interview, it's not going to be about the piece of paper that says, well, I've got a driver's license, I speak English and Afrikaans, and I have a degree. It's going to be about, can you showcase when you thought out of the box? And actually, either tell me a story or show me a video, or give me a video testimonial of somebody saying, gee, Joey here
Yes.
just absolutely pulled a rabbit out of the hat for us when, blah, blah, blah. Or show us your resourcefulness, your resilience, your love of learning. So even how you've cobbled technology together can show resourcefulness, resilience, love of learning, adaptability, flexibility. So these are the kinds of things that employers of the future are looking for. How can you showcase that in a very multimedia way?
Sure.
So that people get you in 5 minutes flat. In fact, if they just watched all of that, they would know whether to bring you in for an interview or not.
Sure. Okay. We're coming up to time. We've got about 10 minutes to go with the panel. So what I'd like to talk about, the book was published in August 2014, but if we talk about things like Moore's Law and the advancement, just how quickly tech advances, what would be, something from each of you, what would be the one thing that you would want to say between now and then? This would be in the updated version. This is something that I feel that's important, that's developed in the last 2 years, because it's almost 2 years. What would those points be? Arthur, put you on the spot first.
I hate to sound arrogant, but we gave a lot of thought.
We brought you here as a tech expert, Arthur. You get to be a little bit.
Okay, we gave a lot of thought to being future-proof in producing the book, knowing that it's not going to be future-proof 5 years from now, but we did look at the technologies that were just beginning to take hold back then, and the intention was that it would remain valid for the next 3 or 4 years. So Snapchat, for example, which is the current rage amongst teenagers, is pretty comprehensively dealt with in the book, because already then you could see which way it was going. You look at what's beginning to take hold in early adopter markets, and therefore what's likely to become big in the next few years. So the big growth area, the biggest growth area of all in social media right now is Snapchat, being driven by teenagers. Overall, the fastest growing social network is Instagram, and that's across the board. It started with photographers, moved down to people sharing their food pictures and selfies, and then it became huge amongst school kids. But it's growing at a rapid pace. They just announced this week 500 million users, and more active daily users than Twitter now on Instagram, and they're also making a lot of money, interestingly. But all of that is kind of presumed in the book as well. So I'd like to think we did a pretty good job of forecasting the near future.
So
Nikki?
the next edition's not for another couple of years.
No, definitely not. You know, as Arthur said, we thought about things very carefully, and we've provided information about concepts that are driving the future. So crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, social activism online, those are very general topics that are starting to take hold. We're starting to really see them, you know, in our everyday lives. And I think for any parent who is unsure of technology, where it's going and how it's applied in everyday life, our book, and I have to brag, sorry,
Of
can
course.
I wave it around?
You brought a book. You brought a book.
We do have a
look.
book, a very real book.
And we actually have,
there's an e-book version too.
and we do have copies on sale at Icon, and there will be a book signing at 12:30 with Arthur.
Yes.
With Nikki, I'm not sure if you're
I'm
still gonna be
happy to sign books straight after this, but
Great.
I think it's a really common sense guide. It certainly is the most common sense guide. One of the main reasons we actually wrote it is because there wasn't a comprehensive common sense guide that sketched the context in which we are living and parenting today. So that's what tech-savvy parenting is really all about.
Excellent. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left. We do have a few audience members. If anybody's got any particular questions in relation to the topic of tech-savvy parenting, If not, while you're thinking of them, we did have an email that came through when we announced the panel, and it was quite lengthy, but the basic topic of the question was, I have a kid who plays a lot. I've heard that lots of gaming can be good for development, not good for your eyes. Should I be worried? Where do I draw the line?
Once again, it's a case of balance. What else is that child doing during the day? If that child is on a screen for hours and hours on end, and I don't know the age of this child.
It was a teenager, 14.
Teenager of 14. So if it was a child of, say, 6 or 7, or even younger than that, that child needs to be moving a lot, because for brain development, we need movement, we need interaction with the world. By 14, hopefully you're still playing a bit of sport and getting some exercise, but it's balancing the on-screen time with homework, being at school, having dinner and having conversation. Once again, it's what's in the pot, the whole pot.
Right.
Dangers of a child being involved in online gaming too much. So let's, sorry, just the detrimental side is there's a lot of dopamine being released in the brain. Hits the pleasure center of the brain, gives the brain a sense of a high. And if we feel good, we want to go and do that again. That's human nature. So we will go back and do it again and again for as long as we can until someone says this is the boundary. You've only got 3 hours on a Saturday morning. At the end of 3 hours, we're going out for lunch. Okay, so where are those boundaries? Children don't know where those boundaries are. We need for our children to be social, not antisocial. Be a healthy switcher. Of course, they're learning amazing stuff. Strategy, eye-hand coordination, loads of learning on digital gaming.
There's one line you can draw, and that is before bedtime. At least an hour, and preferably 2 hours before bedtime. No gaming, certainly. Ideally, no screen time at all.
So you'd extend that to devices as well?
That extends to devices, all devices. But at least an hour before bedtime. For adults, it's a little different because
we can make our own decisions, damn it. I can do what I want.
You can wreck your own sleep patterns, but for kids, you've got a responsibility to ensure that their sleep patterns are as healthy as possible. They need to be awake at school the next day. So by allowing them to play with devices and to play games especially, right up to bedtime, it ensures that those synapses are still firing while they're trying to go to sleep. And it's going to probably deprive them of an hour or two at least, and possibly result also in a restless night. And when your kids aren't getting decent sleep, they can't perform at school as well. So while they're at school, you can draw that line, even up to the age of 18, which we do, in fact. Even at 18, they're still at school, they need their sleep, so screen time ends an hour before bedtime. Those are the kinds, I'm not saying everyone must do that, but those are the kinds of lines you can draw. And because I know we only have 1 minute left to talk, I'm just going to mention that what parents must be aware of is the kind of skills that children will need in 21st century working environments. And these are the directions they should try and encourage their kids into, and the kind of uses of technology they should encourage. And there's 5 key skills: problem solving, creativity, collaboration, negotiation, and human interaction. And the human interaction comes from looking up from the screen. The more they can look up from a screen, the more they're going to interact with other people. And that's probably the healthiest piece of advice I can give to parents right now.
Nikki and Arthur, thank you so much. You guys have been our first live stream panel at ICON ever. So thank you very much for being gracious with your time and coming through. The book is Tech Savvy Parenting. We do have copies on sale here at ICON 2016, Gallagher Convention Center, powered by always-on Wi-Fi, super fast Wi-Fi, wherever you need it. So I'm going to say, guys, thank you very much again for your time. We'll be back in 10 minutes with our Triggerfish Animation Studios Spotlight panel. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Les Allen from Geek XP. If you liked this video, please be so kind as to like the video itself down below. And if you want to get updates on more of these types of videos from the Geek XP channel, please hit subscribe. Thanks very much, guys.